Thank you for coming to the second of the open forums on Middle States today. Work Group A, which is focused on assessment, is going to be making a report about what they've been doing up to this point. Karen is going to be their primary presenter, and then a panel of members are going to field questions at the end. So with that,
thank you. Okay, so first thing I want to do is talk a little bit about the membership of Working Group A. The co-chairs of the committee are myself and Dean Jose Adames, but the committee has a bunch of superhero members, including Tina Kiernan. She represents actually Working Group B, and we also have Bridget Anderson. She is a member of Working Group C. Michael Rowe, who's here, Working Group D. Carla Del Treste, Working Group E. And Debbie Van Buren. And I just want to spend a minute talking about the unique arrangement of the membership of the committee. As you go through the Middle States document, there are instances where there's overlap, actually a good amount of overlap. And the steering committee thought that if we're talking about or trying to review issues such as institutional assessment, that's a huge undertaking, and perhaps, and I think it's working, as the other working groups are doing their research and their reviews of practices and policies, they might glean information about how the institution is performing assessment. So these liaisons really are superheroes because they are working on two committees. They're on their own working group committee, and they also act as a liaison for Working Group A. So they report back to Working Group A what they've learned about institutional assessment during their individual evaluation of those policies and procedures that are tasked to them. So that's a little unique. So they really are doing double, triple, quadruple the work, perhaps, depending on how you look at it. Okay, so our Working Group A, we are tasked with two standards to evaluate. The first one is Standard 7, which is institutional assessment. And Middle States has defined or gave the overarching definition of institutional assessment. Basically means the institution has developed and implemented an assessment process that evaluates its overall effectiveness in achieving its mission and goals and is in compliance with the accreditation standards. That's what we're going to be putting off until this spring semester. So as the individual, Working Group B and C and E, et cetera, are working on their tasks, we hope to be able to put that information together and deal with that in the spring semester. Now, that doesn't mean we don't have a lot to do this semester, because we've been focusing our evaluation on Standard 14, which is the assessment of student learning. And again, Middle States has defined this as the assessment of student learning demonstrates that at graduation or other appropriate points, the institution's students have knowledge, skills, and competencies consistent with institutional and appropriate higher education goals. Okay, so when we tackle Standard 14, there's many subcomponents. The first subcomponent we dealt with was Standard 14.1, in which Middle States says clearly articulated statements of expected student learning outcomes at all levels, institution, degree, program, and course, and for all programs that aim to foster student learning and development. So we went through an array of documents, including sample extended course outlines, because we wanted to verify that student learning outcomes were published and existed. We looked at sample course syllabi to view the materials that students receive. We looked through the college catalog and reviewed the program learning outcomes that are published there. We once again looked at the college's mission. We looked at what happened in 2005 and what the final report from our Middle State evaluators said. And we also reviewed the documentation that involved what our feedback was to Middle States in 2010. And these are some of the things we found. We found that student learning outcomes were indeed identified and published and found on the extended course outlines that we reviewed. So we gave ourselves a check plus. We also, upon review of the catalog, we saw that most AA, AS, and AAS programs had indeed program learning outcomes. We gave ourselves a check. In response to that, the Office of Academic Affairs will now evaluate why not all programs had published program learning outcomes. So there were some that were lacking in the college catalog. And also, I guess a decision needs to be, let the college decide if program learning outcomes should also exist for certificate programs, since they're also found in the college catalog. So that's why we didn't get a check plus there, just a check. Additional findings, we found that student learning outcomes, and when you compared them to program learning outcomes, were appropriately integrated with each other. So we gave ourselves a check plus. We also compared the college's mission statements with the student learning outcomes and program learning outcomes, and we found that they were consonant with each other, so we gave ourselves a check plus. Then as we started to really review some of the other documentation, we started to observe and took notice of a few things, including when we had our Middle States evaluation review in 2005, the team report stated this. Further, so I'm taking this out of context, and this is the sentence I grabbed. Further, the learning outcomes listed are not consistently included in the related materials given to students on the first day of class. So we've established what the student learning outcomes are, and Middle States found that they weren't necessarily distributed to the students. Our report, the college's report back to Middle States in 2010, stated the following. They identified that we should have a recommendation, the institution should have a recommendation, and that is to improve the consistency of course offerings. DCC should look into further standardization of the information required on the course syllabus that is distributed to students. So this is what we told Middle States we were going to do in 2010. In addition, we identified in that same document that the EXOs standardize the content of course syllabi, and student learning outcomes for each class are reviewed with students. So we're telling Middle States once again that the students are being provided with student learning outcomes, most likely in their course syllabus. Right for Middle States, and this shows or demonstrates a little bit of the overlap because it's mentioned not only in Standard 14 but also in Standard 11. Right from the Middle States document, it says course level expected student learning outcomes should be included in course syllabi. And they repeat it again later on in the document when they say an accredited institution is expected to possess or demonstrate the following attributes or activities, and they have a list. And one of those things is course syllabi that incorporate expected learning outcomes. So we thought, well, let's take a look at some sample syllabi to see if indeed our students are provided with student learning outcomes. We took a sampling from the current semester, fall 2013. I solicited basically from departmental secretaries, just send me a couple copies of whatever you have, doesn't matter, we're just going to take a sampling. And it turned out that I received sample syllabi from those crafted by full-time faculty, by part-time faculty, for on-campus courses, and even a few for online courses. I took them from 5 academic departments. You'll see the findings. We felt we didn't have to go any further. We looked at 81 syllabi, and 34 of these syllabi did indeed contain student learning outcomes. Of the 34, though, 7 had student learning outcomes that were either dissimilar to what's published in this extended course outline or completely different from what's found in the extended course outline. So they were either close or completely obviously individualized by the faculty member. So what that comes down to is I wanted to be positive. I didn't want to say 67% lacked them, but 33% of the 81 sample syllabi that we looked at contained student learning outcomes that did indeed match the student learning outcomes published in the extended course outlines. So then we were really kind of puzzled and said, okay, so obviously, that's why we stopped. We figured enough is enough. It's obvious that, we're lacking here. We have to try to figure something out. So we gave ourselves a check minus here. And then we really tried to dig deeper and look for other documentation that actually mentioned, how a syllabus might be crafted. Yes? Mm. Well, out of the 81. So if you... Yes. So 27 out of the 81. Yes, you're welcome. No. Right. You should be sitting up front. I'm kidding, Jackie. So then we really said, all right, so the word's not out there that the course syllabi should have student learning outcomes. So we thought, how can we dig deeper and try to find anywhere in our institution that, other than what we told Middle States, talks about what should be in the course syllabi. So we looked at additional documentation. And we did find in the Adjunct Lecturer Handbook that there is a narrative on page 8 that talks about the importance of having a comprehensive course syllabus. So it is found in the Adjunct Lecturer Handbook. In addition, it includes, the handbook includes an appendix that has a checklist. And when you review the checklist, indeed, student learning outcomes is listed there as well. And I do have that if anyone is interested in reviewing that. Talking to other departments, I also found out that recently, in the fall of 2012 semester, the business department had an extensive discussion about the makeup of the syllabi that are distributed to their students, and they developed their own departmental policy that went into effect in 2013. I don't know if there's anyone from the business department, it doesn't look like it, that could speak to that. So they individually had a discussion and came up with their own particular policy. And that's all we found, unless somebody is aware of it elsewhere. Okay. I do know it's been on the agenda at the curriculum committee, and I believe it's also been placed on the agenda of academic standards, but it's obvious that, the check minus stands. We're not meeting this particular standard, at least consistently. Okay. Yes? We did not. That's another document that we could add to our review list. So you believe it's probably in the concurrent, it is in their handbook. Mm-hmm. Good to know. Yeah. Bring. So it sounds like certain cohorts are probably adhering to the standard and others aren't, so we have to try to figure that out. Well, the college does, or just fact finding.
Based on the fact finding, the curriculum committee actually adopted there are certain things where checklists and what we include in every syllabus at a minimum. It ought to have minimum. It ought to have the name of the course. It ought to have key learning outcomes. It ought to have the grading system that we're using. That's what I mean by template. The rest of it is we can help with the faculty members. Some faculty members have, a 16-page syllabus that goes out, and some faculty members have only 5 pages syllabus that goes out. But there ought to be some consistency and destinations that is that at least at a minimum, 2 learning outcomes ought to be there. And the grading system that you're using, whatever that may be, that the department or yourself has defined. So in that sense, it is a template, but only in the sense that this ought to be included. The rest of it is up to you. Yes, Mike.
And I was just going to talk, and I was the one who used that term, and I did not mean to be insensitive to what they were saying. So I apologize if I contributed
But it came from you. Mike is the president, but I was the one who said we were.
Just for your reference, this is the found in the appendix of the adjunct lecturer handbook, and they do use the word checklist. So, thought that was interesting. Any other questions on this? Okay, we still have a lot of work to do. That was only 14.1. So we are now trying to tackle standard 14.2 and 14.3. 14.2, we're talking about having a documented sustained assessment process to evaluate and improve student learning. So we've just started tackling that one. And in conjunction, we're also trying to handle standard 14.3, which discusses the evidence that students are achieving the key outcomes that we've identified. So we're going to be reviewing and have been reviewing additional documentation, including those course assessment reports. We've gone through a slew, and we're going to probably go through another slew before our next meeting. And we do meet every other Thursday, if anyone would like to join us. Especially those course assessment reports for the capstone courses, because again, we're trying to see if there's that connection between a student learning outcome supporting a program learning outcome, and then perhaps soon or one day we'll then be able to connect it to an institutional student learning outcome. Yes, my friend Jackie. No. Yes, very good question. In the past, program chairs have been asked to identify what might be considered a capstone course in their programs. And Jose was provided with a list of that information. It needed to be a little updated, it was a little outdated, and we're looking for some corrections. So we've looked at course assessment reports of those courses that we really do think people feel comfortable in calling a capstone course. And the idea of a capstone course is it's a course taken late in a student's academic career at Dutchess, where they have the opportunity to try to tie in what they've learned in multiple courses and perhaps put it into an application phase rather than just digesting and trying to learn it. And so we've got a handful of those courses, but we were trying to see if we really did have a good handle on that. So we're still working on that as well. We're going to look at other additional sample course assessment reports, especially for those courses that, by that curriculum mapping that exists, might be able to tell us if we do indeed are assessing what we think we should be assessing and have documentation of that activity. We're looking at assessment schedules. Make sure the academic departments do have indeed a plan to schedule, to assess courses. This is evolving, of course. Our extended course outlines, as they're being updated, the ISLOs are now being included, so we're not yet there, but soon, we hope to be able to take a look at extended course outlines that do document which ISLOs are supported by individual courses. We've looked over the program review guide for both transfer and AAS programs. We'll look at that final assessment plan document when it's available. We have had the opportunity to look at about 5 or 6 sample program review reports, see if they matched up with what the guide says, if they match up to what the schedule was. So there's a lot of just making some connections between what we say we're going to do and if we're actually capable and able to produce the end products. So they are indeed our superheroes. So we're going to finish up with additional questions and answers. We've been answering them along the way, which is fine. Absolutely. You want the microphone?
One of the other things that we discovered with the course assessment that is interesting in looking at is closing the loop. There's course assessments that are done, and the question is, maybe there were feedback in my office, and the question is, what happens with the recommendations that are out there by the assessment? The thinking the program review is what is the outcome of the recommendations or the assessments that are made at the end of it? What is the connection between that and the changes that are made in the courses themselves or in the programs themselves? This is some program reviews or also asking the question, what is the connection between the recommendations that are made at the end of the program reviews and the budgeting process at the institution? So we're trying to link up wherever we can what happens after that, so that we are using program reviews as an institution. And there's some discussion within the group and looking at within my office the structure of the course assessment report itself to make sure that we really follow up and following I think I'm sure following the next year in terms of the recommendations that are made.
Yes, Jackie. Joanna. Absolutely. Even outside of the discipline, when we were looking, let's say I was looking at accounting or something totally out of my area, we were looking at what the program learning outcomes were and some of the student learning outcomes found in syllabi, extended course outlines for accounting type courses. And in some cases, they were almost verbatim. The program learning outcome seemed quite similar to what was a student learning outcome. In other cases, even again outside of my discipline, I got the idea that they were connected. So in some cases, it was very obvious that they matched up. In other cases, I could see that they at least matched up to each other. They were linked somehow. Correct. No, and we did the same thing with the mission statement. There are a few goals that talk about we're going to support programs and offer programs and quality education, and we link those to, you know, the general student learning outcomes that exist. Yeah, you're welcome. Yes. Yeah, when we looked at the sample program review reports, there was indeed mapping that existed. So that's how we pulled which courses we looked at. We didn't just grab, you know, select just a random dance course to see if it supported PFA, for example, but we looked what was mapped and then tried to review those EXOs to see if they matched up. And that's Debbie's book. You see Debbie's book? Can you zoom in on the book for the Joanna? There's 14. There are 14 standards. Oh, in 14, it goes to 14.5. We did 14.1. We feel pretty confident that we're finished with it, and now we're heading into 14.2 and 14.3. We're going to do those together. I have the information. It might have to do with I think it might have to do with what Jose was talking about with the closing the loop and evidence that after you go through the whole assessment cycle, it really is a cycle, and let's continue on and talk about supporting what the findings were. Oh, you got them? Awesome. So yeah, 4 and 5. So you can see, especially with 14.5, we're going back to how does the institution as a whole then work with the results from. You're welcome. Took a while. Yes, Sarah. No, it's used mostly during that program, part of the program review process. Yes. Right. Right. Mm-hmm. Oh. Oh, okay. And what is this from, Debbie? Oh, here, you want to put it up? I'll let you put it up. So this actually is from, Debbie found it in her binder. This is in the guide for program reviews. Oh. Just put it right there. See how? Yeah, I'll shrink it. You want to get the second one? I mean, it's an Excel program. This is outdated because it has the old DCC academic objectives. That's one section, yeah. And then lower, let's see. This is where the individual program reviews will be. Yeah, can you see the screen? I do.
certain course that is assigned to middle school is also an assessment of a period of time, once or twice a semester, an academic year. And at what stage they can complete this program by taking a series of courses. I'm sure that most, if not all, programs have that mechanism.
Jose, if I might, you're wearing double hats as you're responding to that question, and that's sort of one of the different things I can see in the initial process, is the work groups are taking stock of what we're doing, but then the college has to take that information in the various divisions and make decisions about what our planning processes are, what our review processes are, and I think review processes, that's another way of saying assessment processes. And middle state wants us to take a big look at this, that Bill has described as gap analysis. It's then the college's job to take that gap analysis, see what we're doing well and getting check pluses on, what we're not doing well and getting check for check minuses on. But then our normal functioning, sort of like drafting was talking about, drafting functions, regular functions of the college to respond to the middle state result study. The result study only just gives us a heads up about, are we doing what we're saying we're doing, and if we're not, where are the gaps? And then the college's job to do something with that, not the middle state work. And Jose was wearing two hats there as well.
I'm a habit of doing
Other questions or comments? Oh, thank you. The superhero, super team, absolutely.
We thought about coming in uniform.
Yeah. They left their capes. The capes are in the restroom. We didn't wear the capes. Yeah.